Effective immediately, Harold. Your access to this building is revoked. Please collect your things. My son-in-law said it like he was reading off a teleprompter. Loud enough that the catering staff in the back stopped restocking the coffee station. Loud enough that the 18 distributors I'd flown him from across the country heard every word. 18 people. Phoenix, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Charlotte, Sacramento, Denver, Pittsburgh, Tampa. Men and women I'd been working with for the better part of 2 decades. We were 40 minutes away from finalizing a $1.8 billion national distribution agreement. The contracts were stacked in front of each one of them. Pens uncapped. Coffee getting cold because nobody wanted to take a sip and miss the moment of signing. And here was Brandon. 36 years old, married my daughter 4 years ago. Took over as CEO 18 months back when I stepped up to chairman. Standing at the head of a room I built and a company I built, telling me to pack up like I was some intern caught stealing pens from the supply closet. My name is Harold Pemberton. I'm 57 years old. I started Pemberton Beverage Group out of a rented garage in Cincinnati in 1998 with a recipe my grandfather scribbled on the back of a feed store receipt. Cream soda, real cane sugar, glass bottles when everybody else went plastic. Right now, I'm standing in the Riverview Conference Center watching my son-in-law try to bury me in front of the same people who built this company with me. But here's what Brandon doesn't know. I saw this coming back in March. And the trap I built, he's standing inside of it, right now, smiling for the cameras. The room got quiet in a way that's hard to describe. You ever been in a real boardroom when something goes wrong? It's not silence exactly. It's the sound of 18 people deciding very quickly which side they're on. I looked across the table at Earl Whitman. Earl runs the Atlanta distribution territory. We met in 2003 when he was driving a route truck for Coca-Cola, and I was trying to convince a regional chain to put my cream soda on 3 shelves of cooler space. Earl gave me the smallest nod. Not pity, not surprise. Recognition. Earl knew. He'd known for months. Let me tell you about my marriage. My wife Diane passed 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time we caught it. 9 weeks from diagnosis to the morning I held her hand in our bedroom and watched her go. She was 61 years old. We'd been married 34 years. For most of those 34 years, I wasn't home enough. I missed our daughter Megan's high school graduation because I was negotiating shelf space with a chain in St. Louis. I missed our son Tyler's wedding rehearsal dinner because a bottling line broke down in Kentucky and I drove there myself to fix it. Tyler hasn't really spoken to me since his mother died. He thinks I checked out. He's not entirely wrong. I built a company worth almost $2 billion and I have one child who still picks up the phone when I call. That child is Megan. And 4 years ago, she married Brandon Whitfield. Wharton MBA. Worked at a private equity firm for 6 years before joining the family business. Said he wanted to learn the trade. Said he wanted to honor what I built. I should have known. Diane warned me. The week before the wedding, she sat me down on the back porch and said, "Harold, that boy looks at this company the way other people look at a steak dinner." I told her she was being paranoid. I told her our daughter could pick her own husband. I told her a lot of things. I should have listened. When Diane died, Brandon was at the funeral wearing a suit that cost more than my first delivery truck. He gave a eulogy. Talked about how Diane was the heart of the Pemberton family vision. People cried. I cried. Then 6 weeks later, he sat down with the board and started talking about succession planning. He didn't say it in front of me. He didn't have to. The general counsel told me. Bill Hennessy. Bill's been with me since 2006. He came to my office on a Tuesday morning and closed the door and said, "Harold, you need to know what's being discussed." What was being discussed was this. Brandon thought I'd lost my edge after Diane passed. Brandon thought the company needed next-generation leadership for the modern consumer landscape. Brandon thought a 57-year-old man who still drove a 2014 Chevy Silverado and ate lunch at the same diner 3 days a week wasn't the right face for a national rollout. What Brandon really thought, though he'd never say it out loud, was that he'd married into a gold mine and the only thing standing between him and the C-suite was a grieving old man. So I started planning. The national distribution deal had been my idea from the start. 2.5 years of work. I'd personally visited every one of those 18 regional distributors, sat at their kitchen tables, met their kids, drank their bad office coffee, listened to them complain about the chains squeezing margins and the craft brands eating up cooler space. I told them Pemberton was going national. I told them they'd be the backbone of it. I told them this wasn't going to be like the corporate raiders who buy you out and then squeeze you dry. This was going to be a partnership. 20 years from now, we'd all still be at the same table. They believed me, because for 26 years I'd never broken a handshake with any of them. Brandon wanted in on the deal once he saw the projections. He wanted his name on the press release. He wanted to be the modernizing CEO who took a regional cream soda brand and turned it into a billion-dollar national play. I let him think he was driving the bus. What he didn't know was that I'd already drilled a hole in the floorboards. Back in March, right after our annual shareholder meeting, I sat in my office at 2 a.m. reading through the preliminary contracts our legal team had drafted with the distributors. I was thinking about something Diane told me toward the end. She said, "Harold, the worst thing about dying isn't dying. It's worrying about what happens to the people who depended on you." I wasn't worried about myself. I was worried about Earl Whitman in Atlanta. I was worried about Lorraine Yoshida, who ran our Sacramento territory. I was worried about Pete Brennan up in Minneapolis, who'd put his life savings into expanding his warehouse on my word 3 years ago. If Brandon took over and started cutting deals to maximize his exit valuation, those people would get squeezed first. The handshake deals I'd made over 20 years would mean nothing. So I called Bill Hennessy, told him I needed a new clause inserted into every distributor agreement. Buried deep, not flashy, just there. The clause was simple. If the named principal sponsor of this agreement, defined as Harold J.G. Pemberton, is removed from his executive role with Pemberton Beverage Group at any point prior to the final ceremonial signing on October 8th, all preliminary memoranda of understanding shall be rendered null and void, with no possibility of renegotiation under the existing framework. Null and void, not subject to amendment, not open to further discussion. Null and void. Now here's the trick. I didn't sell it to the distributors as protection for me. That would have raised eyebrows. I sold it as protection for them. I told Earl, who already knew Brandon was a snake. I told Lorraine, who'd had her own son-in-law problems with a different business. I told Pete, who'd worked too hard to get taken advantage of in his 60s. I said, "Look, I'm not getting any younger. If something happens to me, or if there's any sudden change in leadership before this thing is signed, you all need a release valve. You shouldn't be locked into terms with strangers." Every single one of them signed off on it. Brandon never read past page 2 of the executive summary. Why would he? It was an old man's deal in an old man's industry. He had bigger fish to fry. He was probably already picking out office furniture for the corner suite. Then I added the second lock. You know what most CEOs don't understand? The signature isn't what closes a deal. The signature is theater. The real legal mechanism is the authentication. 3 years ago, after a security audit, our company implemented a secure digital execution protocol for all major contracts. Anything over $50 million required a hardware key authentication from a designated officer. That designated officer was me, by name. In the bylaws. Updated and ratified by the board in 2022. I carried the hardware key on a small fob in my briefcase. Looked like nothing. Looked like a USB drive you'd buy at Staples for $9. Without that key being physically present and authenticated by my fingerprint at the moment of signing, the contracts couldn't be uploaded to the Federal Interstate Commerce filing system, and without that filing, the distribution agreements had no legal teeth across state lines. The federal piece is what made it ironclad. Beverage distribution is regulated state by state. We needed simultaneous filings in all 18 jurisdictions, time-stamped within a 4-hour window. Without my authentication, the whole architecture collapsed. Brandon never knew about the bylaw amendment. Or if he saw it, he never thought it mattered. He'd never personally executed a contract over $50 million. He'd been CEO for 18 months, and the biggest deal he'd touched had been signed using the old protocol before the security update. I sat in that boardroom on October 8th and felt the weight of that fob in my pocket, about the size of a quarter. And I watched my son-in-law strut around the room shaking hands with people who'd been my friends for longer than he'd been alive. 20 minutes before the meeting started, my phone buzzed. Text from Bill Hennessy. He brought the new GC with him. The guy from Cooley. Brandon's planning to announce a leadership transition for signing. I don't think you have much time. I read that text 3 times. The new general counsel was a kid Brandon hired 6 months ago over my objections. Some 30-year-old with a law degree from Cornell and absolutely zero experience in beverage compliance. Brandon had been quietly transitioning legal matters away from Bill, who'd been telling me about it the whole time. I texted Bill back, "Stay close, don't interfere, let it play." Then I walked into the boardroom and shook Brandon's hand like nothing was wrong. When he said the words, "Effective immediately, Harold, your access to this building is revoked. Please collect your things," my first instinct was to throw the coffee carafe at his face, but I didn't move. I planned for this. I'd rehearsed it in my head for months. The only thing I let myself feel was a slow, deep breath. The kind my father used to take before he swung an axe. I stood up, pushed my chair in carefully, the way Diane always pushed hers in at restaurants. I looked at Brandon. Then I looked at the 18 distributors. I didn't say a word. Earl Whitman closed his folder. The sound of leather meeting leather. He didn't open it again. Lorraine Yoshida capped her pen and set it down on the table about an inch to the left of her contract. In some boardrooms, that's just a thing. In others, it means the deal's over. Pete Brennan from Minneapolis took a long sip of his coffee. Then, he set the cup down and folded his hands. Brandon didn't see any of this. He was too busy gesturing toward the new general counsel and saying something about transition and exciting new chapter. His voice had that brittle confidence that people use when they're trying to convince themselves something is going well. I picked up my briefcase, walked toward the door. I had my hand on the brass handle when Earl spoke up. "Brandon, before we proceed, I have a question about Section 14 of the agreement." I stopped. Didn't turn around. Just stood there with my hand on the door. Brandon laughed. Actually laughed. "Earl, please. We can address any concerns after we sign. I think we all want to get to the celebratory dinner." Earl didn't laugh back. "Section 14, Brandon. The continuity clause. Could you walk me through how that's affected by the transition you just announced?" Section 14 was the diplomatic clause, the one I'd buried 6 months ago. The one that voided everything if I was removed. Brandon flipped through his contract. Too fast. Way too fast. He didn't know what he was looking for. The new general counsel leaned over and started whispering. Brandon's jaw tightened. "Section 14 is a standard continuity provision, Earl. It doesn't apply to internal leadership decisions." That was the wrong answer, and every distributor in that room knew it. Lorraine spoke up next. Her voice was calm, polite. The way she'd taught herself to talk after 30 years of being the only woman in beverage industry meetings. "Brandon, with all due respect, the agreement specifically names Harold J. Port, Pemberton, as principal sponsor. We accepted that designation as a material condition of our willingness to commit to a multi-year exclusive distribution arrangement. Without that designation, we'd need to revisit the entire framework." Pete Brennan stood up. He was 63 years old and had bad knees, and it took him a second. But he stood up. "I'm not signing this without Harold at the head of the table. I never was. None of us were." I turned around, slowly, set my briefcase down. Brandon's face was a particular shade of red I'd never seen on him before. Even at family Thanksgivings when my brother got political. He looked at the new general counsel like the guy was going to magically produce a solution. The guy from Cooley was reading Section 14 for the first time. I could see his lips moving. I could see the exact moment he hit the words null and void. He whispered something to Brandon. Brandon's face went from red to white. "This is a misunderstanding," Brandon said. His voice had climbed half an octave. "Harold isn't being removed. He's being transitioned to an advisory role. He'll still be involved." "Brandon." Earl's voice was patient. "The way you talk to a child who's lying about a broken vase. You just told him to collect his things and escorted his access. That's removal. Section 14 is unambiguous." One by one, 18 people started closing their folders, capping their pens, sliding the contracts back across the table toward Brandon. Nobody yelled. Nobody made a speech. They just stopped participating. Lorraine Yoshida picked up her purse. "Harold, would you walk me out? I'd like to discuss something." I picked up my briefcase, held the door open for her. Pete Brennan followed. Then Earl, then a tall woman from Charlotte whose name I'd been mispronouncing for 10 years until she finally corrected me in 2019 and we both laughed about it for an hour. Brandon's voice rose. Wait, everyone, please, we can resolve this. Just give me 5 minutes, nobody waited. I'll tell you the part I didn't expect. The part that still gets me. The hallway outside the conference room was lined with windows looking out over the Ohio River. October sun coming in low and gold across the carpet. And as we walked, Pete Brennan put his hand on my shoulder. Pete's not a hugger. Pete's a Minnesota Norwegian who shakes hands like he's checking the firmness of a melon. He squeezed once. Didn't say anything. Just walked beside me. Earl Whitman caught up on my other side. Harold, I'd like to set up a call tomorrow morning. I have some ideas. Earl, I appreciate that, but I don't even know what I am anymore. The company is. The company isn't the bottles, Harold. You know that. The company is the people who agreed to sell the bottles. We're here. The brand is just paperwork. I stopped walking, right there in the hallway. Lorraine looked at me. Harold, why don't you think about it? But the 8 of us who run the West Coast and mountain regions have already been talking. We were planning to approach you next month. About what? About what we'd do if anything ever happened to you at Pemberton. We weren't going to let 20 years of work disappear because of a son-in-law. I didn't trust my voice for a few seconds. I just nodded. We took the elevator down. 18 distributors. One old man with a hardware fob in his pocket and absolutely no idea what came next. The lobby was crowded with the press team Brandon had hired. Photographers. A B-roll videographer. A young woman with a clipboard asking us to stand for the official partnership photo. She hadn't gotten the memo. Earl shook her hand politely and said, Sweetheart, you should probably take the rest of the day off. Out on the sidewalk, the air was sharp. The kind of October air in Cincinnati that smells like leaves and barbecue and the river all at once. My phone started buzzing in my pocket and didn't stop. The first call was from Pete. He'd already left the building and was sitting in his rental car. Harold, I need to say this before I lose my nerve. I'm 63 years old. My kids don't want the warehouse. I've been thinking about selling for 2 years. But what I really want to do is help build something honest one more time. Whatever you're doing next, I'm in. You don't even have to tell me what it is yet. Second call, Lorraine. Harold, 8 of us are catching a flight to Cincinnati tomorrow. We want to sit down with you. We'll come to your kitchen table if you want. We're not letting this go to waste. Third call. A number I didn't recognize. Mr. Pemberton, this is Charles Beaumont. I run private banking for the Midwest division of a firm you'd recognize. I have a meeting on my calendar that just got canceled. I was supposed to be coordinating financing for the deal you were signing today. My team has been working on that file for 6 months. I'd like to know if you have time for a coffee tomorrow. I sat down on a bench outside the conference center. The bench was cold. I felt every one of my 57 years sitting there. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired, and underneath the tired, I felt something I hadn't felt since Diane was alive. I felt like somebody saw me. The phone calls kept coming. I let most of them go to voicemail. I just sat on that bench in the October sun and watched the river move. Around 4 in the afternoon, my daughter Megan called. I almost didn't answer. I figured Brandon had already gotten to her. I figured I was about to lose the only child who still talked to me. But I answered. Dad? Hi, sweetheart. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped. Dad. Brandon just got home. He's drinking. He's saying things about you. I need you to tell me the truth. What happened today? I told her. All of it. The clauses. The bylaw amendments. The 18 distributors. The phone calls. I told her about Bill Hennessy. I told her I'd seen this coming since March. When I was done, she was crying quietly. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to put you in the middle. He's your husband, Meg. Dad. He's been talking about you for months. The things he says, to me, to his friends. I didn't want to believe it. I kept thinking I was reading it wrong. I kept thinking you two would work it out. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Dad, can I come over tonight? Just me? Just me, not him. Yeah, of course. Yeah, sweetheart. That was October 8th, a Tuesday. By the following Monday, I had filed paperwork for a new company. Pemberton Heritage Beverages. Just the brand I'd built. Different corporate structure. Different ownership. Because, here's the thing that Brandon never understood about the original Pemberton Beverage Group. He was the CEO of a holding company. The actual recipes and trademarks were licensed to that company through a separate IP entity I'd set up in 2011 after a tax attorney friend convinced me to. Brandon controlled the warehouses, the trucks, the bottling equipment, the office leases. I controlled the recipes. I controlled the name. I controlled the brand my grandfather scribbled on the back of a feed store receipt. Without those, the company Brandon ran was an empty shell. I called him 3 weeks later. He picked up on the first ring. "Harold, thank God. Look, we can work this out. The board is open to bringing you back as chairman with expanded Brandon. I'm not coming back. I'm calling because I'd like to buy the warehouses and the bottling equipment from you. I'll pay fair market value. I have the financing lined up." Silence on the line. "You're going to start a new company." "I already did. We're licensing the IP through Pemberton Heritage. The distributors have all signed letters of intent. Charles Beaumont's group is funding the buyout." He laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when somebody is trying not to scream. "Harold, you're 57 years old. You're going to start over? From scratch?" "I'm not starting over. I'm continuing. You're the one who has to start over." I let him think about that for a second. "My offer for the assets is generous, Brandon. Take it. Because in 6 months, without my recipes and without my distributors, those warehouses are going to be worth half what I'm offering. In a year, they'll be worthless. You'll explain that to the board however you want." He took the offer. 11 weeks of legal back and forth. But he took it. I'm sitting in my new office now. It's the same desk I had at the original Pemberton facility. I bought it back from Brandon as part of the asset deal because I'd built that desk myself in 2001 from oak boards I salvaged from an old barn outside Cincinnati. It has a coffee ring from 2004 that I never sanded out because Diane spilled it when she visited me at work the day Tyler was born. The new building isn't fancy. 45,000 square feet on the west side of town. I drove past it every day for 10 years and never thought I'd own it. 18 distributors became 14. Because 4 of them retired and sold their territories to younger operators we trained up over the past year. Pete Brennan is one of my founding partners now. So was Earl. So was Lorraine. Megan files for divorce in March. She's living in our old guest room. Tyler called me last week for the first time in 2 years. He didn't apologize and I didn't ask him to. He just said he saw a write-up in a trade publication about what we're doing and he wanted to know how I was. We talked for 40 minutes. He's coming home for Christmas with his wife and the grandson I've never met. Brandon got fired from the original holding company about 10 weeks after the asset sale. The board couldn't ignore the fact that he'd lost the entire distribution network, the founder, and the brand IP in a single afternoon. Last I heard, he moved to Charlotte and took a job as a director of strategy at a regional snack food company. He reports to a 61-year-old VP who came up driving a route truck for Frito-Lay. There's a story in there somewhere about how the world keeps turning. I'm too tired to write it. Last Tuesday, we signed our first national distribution agreement. 11 states to start. $2.1 billion over 5 years. We did it in our conference room with no press, no photographers, no cameras. Just the 14 of us and a stack of contracts and one of those cheap pens you get free at the bank. When my turn came, I picked up the pen and looked across the table at Earl. He nodded. I signed. Then I capped the pen and slid it across to Pete because he's the one who put his hand on my shoulder in the hallway that day. I wanted him to have something to remember. Pete looked at the pen, then he looked at me, then he said, "Harold, this is a BIC. It cost the bank about 11 cents. The whole table laughed. Lorraine laughed so hard she had to take her glasses off. I haven't laughed like that since Diane was alive. Some prices are worth paying, and some prices you only find out years later were paid for by somebody else who saw you long before you saw yourself. I think Diane saw it. I think she always saw it. I think she warned me about Brandon because she knew, the way she always knew, that the people you build with matter more than the things you build. I'm 57 years old. I have a daughter living in my guest room and a son who's coming home for Christmas, and a grandson I haven't met yet, and 14 partners who walked out of a billion-dollar deal because my son-in-law didn't read past page 2. I'm not starting over. I'm just finally getting started. I've been thinking a lot about what happened that October afternoon, and I keep coming back to one truth. The day my son-in-law tried to humiliate me wasn't really about him. It was about what I'd built over 26 years, quietly, when nobody was watching. Brandon thought he was taking something from me. What he didn't understand is that you can't take what was never just paperwork. 18 distributors walked out of that room because I'd spent 2 decades earning the right to ask them to. Earl Whitman didn't follow me into that hallway because he liked me. He followed me because in 2008, when his daughter got sick and he couldn't make a payment on his warehouse lease, I rerouted 3 months of orders through Atlanta to keep him afloat. I never mentioned it again. I never had to. The work you do quietly is the work that returns to you the loudest. That's the part I want you to take with you. Character isn't what you show people in conference rooms. Character is what you do when nobody's keeping score. Brandon spent 6 years building a resume. I spent 26 years building relationships. When the moment came, the resume was just paper. The relationships stood up and walked out. I'll tell you something else I learned. Wisdom isn't the same as intelligence. Brandon was smart, Wharton MBA, top of his class, fluent in every buzzword the consulting world has invented in the last decade. But he never read past page 2 of the contracts he was supposed to be signing. He never asked Earl Whitman about his daughter. He never sat at Pete Brennan's kitchen table in Minneapolis. He thought wisdom was something you could skip if you were clever enough. He was wrong. Cleverness without humility is just a faster way to lose. And then there's the matter of holding your ground. I was 57 years old standing in that boardroom with my hand on the door. My instinct was to leave quietly, to preserve some dignity, to not make a scene. But sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is stay put and let the truth do its work. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just refused to disappear on somebody else's timeline. That kind of patience isn't passive. It's the hardest thing a man can practice. You have to trust that what you built is real, even when somebody is telling the whole room it isn't. Diane used to say the people you build with matter more than the things you build. I didn't fully understand her until she was gone. Now I understand it every morning when I walk into my new office and see Pete's coat on the rack and hear the rain laughing in the conference room. The bottles are just bottles. The brand is just a name. The 14 people who chose to start over with me at 57 years old. That's the thing my grandfather actually built when he scribbled his recipe on the back of that receipt. He just didn't know it yet. Build quietly. Read past page 2. And when the moment comes, stay still and let the truth speak.